Welcome to Brooklyn Historical Society. So my name is Amaka Okachukwu, and I'm the project coordinator of the Voices of Crown Heights project. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our project before we introduce everyone today. So Voices of Crown Heights is an oral history project that seeks to document the history of the neighborhood through the voices of the people that live, work, and are invested in the livelihood of Crown Heights. So often discourse about the neighborhood begins with the events of '91 and ends with gentrification. This project seeks to go deeper through highlighting the community organizations, institutions, and the work that has made Crown Heights meaningful to so many people. This project does this both through public programming as well as through oral history. In order to carry out this project, we partnered with two organizations that work in Crown Heights, Weeksville Heritage Center and Brooklyn Movement Center. Weeksville Heritage Center is a longtime cultural institution in Crown Heights and a historic site, and they organized public programming and collected oral histories related to the theme of education in Crown Heights. Brooklyn Movement Center is a member-driven organization, organizing body that serves Crown Heights and Bedford-Stuyvesant. And as part of their part of the project, they organized public programming and collected oral histories related to police accountability and community safety. Brooklyn Historical Society trained interviewers from each organization to collect oral histories and collaborated with them on the public programming. So we want to thank Weeksville Heritage Center and Brooklyn Movement Center for their contributions to this project. It's been an amazing project. We also worked with organizations such as Repair the World and Crown Heights Tenants Union and trained them as well as other community members to conduct oral histories and do research. In the fall, the oral histories from this project will be available at the oral history stations located in Crown Heights and hosted by Weeksville Heritage Center and Brooklyn Movement Center. The oral histories will also be widely available to the public on Brooklyn Historical Society's oral history portal, which debuted earlier this year. You can visit that at brooklynhistory.org/oral history. In addition to the Voices of Crown Heights oral history collection, 3 other oral history collections related to Crown Heights will be available on this portal as well. Also in the fall, an interpretive website will debut, which will provide more content, including essays, oral history clips, and archival materials related to Crown Heights. So definitely check that out when that launches. For more information on Voices of Crown Heights, please visit brooklynhistory.org/projects/Crown Heights. So everyone, I'm sure you can see that there are evaluations on your chairs. Please, please, please fill out these evaluations. Just take a moment after the end of the program and just write your thoughts about the program. We really want to hear feedback. And we've been doing evaluations at each piece of this program. So this is our last public program. Please fill them out. You can turn them in at either of the circular tables as you exit, and just leave them there as long as the pencils, as well as the pencils. And then for housekeeping, some of you have already figured this out, but for restrooms, it's to your left and down the stairs. You can also flag an employee here, Brooklyn Historical Society staff, and they can show you where the restrooms are as well. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge our funders for whom this project would not be possible without. So we would like to acknowledge the support of New York Community Trust, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, the Nissan Foundation, and Brooklyn Community Foundation in partnership with its Neighborhood Strength Initiative. So thank you to our funders. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brooklyn Historical Society's oral historian and the project director of Voices of Crown Heights, Zahir Ali, who will introduce the rest of the program.
Thank you, and thank you, Amaka. And if you haven't been able to tell yet, that's why she's been such an amazing project coordinator for this project. She has been the one holding all of the pieces together, and very much appreciate her work. This is our final of 7 public programs that we've been doing on Crown Heights. We started the first one last August, which was the 25th anniversary of the 1991 unrest. And tonight, we are looking at the present and looking forward. So I am happy to see such a great turnout and happy to introduce our guests. So I'm going to introduce the moderator, and then all of our guests will come up on stage and she will take over from there. And for those of you who know our moderator, you know she's well able to manage a conversation. And that is, of course, Joyanne Reid. She is a political analyst at MSNBC and host of AM Joy on Saturday, which airs Saturdays and Sundays from 10 a.m. to noon, 12 p.m. She is also the author of the book Fracture, Barack Obama, the Clintons, and the Racial Divide, which came out in 2015, and the co-editor with Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne of We Are the Change We Seek, the speeches of Barack Obama, which came out last year. She's also a columnist for the Daily Beast. I'm personally invested in her success because we were college mates. I'm going to embarrass her a little bit. I was a freshman, and I won't say what year she was. We weren't in the same class, but I just remember taking a political science class, and Joy was one of the students in that class, and she blew away the class every time she contributed to the discussion. So to see what she's doing now, I am not surprised. She was blowing folks out the water many years ago. And it's also very special to have her moderate this program because she is not just a Brooklyn resident, but also a Crown Heights resident. So with that, I introduce to you Joyanne Reid.
Thank you. All right, I'm loud, but I might not be as loud as I thought I was. All right, let me introduce everyone, but I want to start by thanking the Brooklyn Historical Society. I was so excited to sort of belatedly discover the existence of this place, in part because my former school chum, Zahir Ali, is working here. And if you haven't had a chance to really walk around it, it's like Hogwarts upstairs. It's so cool. And I think that Zahir has the coolest job in the world. So I want to thank him and Amaka for getting me to be here and inviting me. And when I get the invitation from Zahir, I'm always going to show up. So I really appreciate him and Amaka for their friendship and for reaching out to me. And of course, thank you to Deborah Schwartz for putting this whole thing on and running this fabulous place. And thank you to all of you who came out. Look how many people love history. I love it. Look, it's like a nerd convention. It's fabulous. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful panel, and I'll read them off. We have them sitting in the order I'm going to read them off in alphabetical order. So we're going to start to my immediate left is Amy Ellenbogen, and Amy currently serves as the director of the Crown Heights Community Mediation Center, and that's a project of the Center for Court Innovation. The center works to build safer and healthier communities for all residents through programs in schools, hospitals, and the streets. She founded and directs SOS Brooklyn, which is the first cure violence replication in New York State, which employs a public health paradigm to end gun violence. Please give Amy a round of applause. Next to Amy is Rabbi Mordechai Lightstone, and he is the social media editor for Chabad.org. It's the official website for the Chabad Lubavitch movement, headquartered, of course, in Crown Heights. He's a founder of Tech Tribe, an organization that makes events and experiences for Jews in tech and digital media. He first came to Crown Heights in 1998, has lived there since 2007. And he said I can call him Mordechai, but I wanted to give him his rabbi honorific first. So let's give him a round of applause. And to Rabbi Mordechai's left is Lisa Mathis, and Lisa is a Brooklynite and tenant advocate. She was born and raised in Kings County and has been a resident of Crown Heights for over 4 decades. She's part of the Crown Heights Tenant Union. Some fans. She organized the 80 New York Avenue Tenants Association in her building and has fought for tenant rights on many different fronts and arenas, including lobbying the Albany legislature for stronger tenant protections in the rent laws and lobbying the New York City, the City Council for the Stand for the Tenant Safety Bills. Give Lisa a round of applause. Hi, Malik. I have one of my producers in the front, so I'm embarrassing. Hi, Malik. I should have brought my own cheering section. I brought Malik. Malik, I expect you to be really loud and cheer, because I only brought one cheer. Next to Lisa is Sharon Wedderburn. Sharon is a financial services professional, community volunteer, and advocate. She's a Crown Heights native and resident whose advocacy is focused on educational opportunities and outcomes for Central Brooklyn public school children. She's a borough resident appointed member of Community Board 8 where she chairs the Youth and Education Committee and serves on the Housing and Uniform Land Use and Review Procedure Committees. Give Sharon a round of applause, please. And last but certainly not least, a lot of you may know Michael Zayas more by his establishments that you probably frequent around Crown Heights. He moved here in 2011 and opened the coffee shop called Little Zelda Coffee. And since then, he has founded and owns 9, that's why I put my Starbucks on the floor, because I didn't want him to know that I didn't have Little Zelda Coffee. Since then, he founded and owns 9 businesses in Crown Heights: Hullabaloo Books, Linden Hair Salon, Simply Syrup Wine Shop, Jewel City Yoga Studio, Nagel's Bagels, I have some people who know these places, Cafe Nagel's, Two Saints Bar, and opening this summer, Strawberry Peacock, an ice cream store and family space. And under the umbrella of Crown Heights 2020, Michael's goal is a collection of community-minded businesses and nonprofits that work to advance a spirit of neighborhood unity while providing authentic career paths for employment for local residents. And he attends the CUNY School of Law. Give Michael a round of applause. If the Brooklyn Historical Society does another module on how to open a business, you're booked for that. You're booked for that. All right, so I want to start off by asking, and this is a question for everybody. I'm going to give a couple of the ground rules. If you want to tweet about this event, you can tweet about it at hashtag VOCH, which stands for Voices of Crown Heights. Feel free to tweet. We are not making this closed to the public. You can tweet anything you like. I'll try not to say anything that gets me fired, so we'll just all tweet. That's why I'm the moderator, so I'm in a great position. I want to just go down the row and ask everybody too. We only have about 55 minutes for this portion, and then we're going to open it up to you guys for questions. We want to make sure everybody's kind of clipped and soundbiting so that we can get everybody in. But I'm going to start with a question for everybody, and I'll just start with Amy and move all the way down. Because I think when you hear the name Crown Heights, people have kind of an association with that. Most people only remember one thing about Crown Heights in general, and it's the riots that took place in the early 1990s. And people think Crown Heights is that riot town. What does that narrative miss about Crown Heights? What should people really understand about this community? Amy.
Good evening, everybody. So I've been thinking a lot because we got these questions beforehand. And first, I have to say I was not in the neighborhood in 1991, but I was living uptown in Manhattan. And when the violence happened, it was something that affected me quite deeply and ultimately led to me moving and working in Crown Heights as I have for the past 15 years. But I think something that sometimes people miss is how much the violence was not a part of everybody's lives, and that so many people, young people, were going to school and having dramas with their boyfriends and girlfriends and going to work, and that this wasn't the central event in their lives. As it was, and in some ways for people outside of Crown Heights, it became hugely symbolic, even internationally, of larger issues between African Americans and Jewish people. And in the midst of it all, while it did profoundly affect so many people's lives, there were other people who were just carrying on their lives and didn't, I know somebody who lived in the neighborhood and was riding his bike by and saw a police car on fire and was like, what's going on? And didn't know anything about what was happening a few blocks away.
And Mordechai, for you as well, I mean, you didn't live here yet at that time, I think that's the caveat, but in your community, when you talk to people in your community, because as many people who don't remember that incident, it began when a motorcade that was associated with a very revered rabbi in Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism, when the motorcade, when one car in it struck a 8-year-old boy who was Guyanese background, and you saw people pouring out into the streets, and it just sort of escalated when people who were in the streets, in the community, trying to lift the car off of the young boy, felt that the people in the motorcade weren't responding to him, and then I believe there was an ambulance that was associated with the motorcade came up and didn't do anything about the boy. Riots ensued. There was a lot of violence, a lot of destruction. A young man named Yankel Rosenbaum was actually killed, who was a member of the Orthodox community. So that's the sort of short version of it. So from the point of view, of the Jewish community that is also very endemic to Crown Heights, what do you think is missed in that sort of meta-narrative, that narrative about Crown Heights?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what's missed is really everything else. When you look at the totality of the Crown Heights experience, and what it is, you miss the people, you miss the humanity. I mean, when I think about Crown Heights, I think about two main things. I think about Crown Heights as a place of people of faith. We have people, amongst my African American, Caribbean American neighbors who go to church, worship, fellowship, things like that. Obviously within the Jewish community, within the Hasidic community, you have, people go to synagogues, and all that whole experience of people who are spiritual people, who are godly people, that's overlooked. And I think that's the majority of the neighborhood in one way or another. Obviously, each person has their own unique way of expressing it, but I think that's something that's overlooked. I mean, I think about not just in terms of faith and prayer, but in terms of scholarship as well. I mean, next door to my office at the Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters, so we have one of the largest collections of Judaica in the world. There are 250,000 books in Hebrew and Yiddish, about 50,000 books in English, French, Italian, Spanish, and this is, a whole, world of wisdom and scholarship, and I think that is one thing that's overlooked, the godly nature of the place. And I think the other thing that's overlooked is the joy of Crown Heights. Crown Heights is a place, I think, of immense joy. You think about the Labor Day parade, when people go and they're able to walk down Eastern Parkway, and it's a parade route. You're able to go and say, I'm here, I'm proud of who I am, I'm proud of my heritage, and the celebration. I know as a Lubavitcher, when you look at the holiday of Sukkot, which is kind of the end of the holiday season, so there's something called Simchas Beis HaShoeva, where every night of the holiday, from basically sundown until sunrise, you have people dancing in the street and singing, and there's just this immense joy of who you are and pride of who you are. So I think those two things are overlooked.
Same question. All right. Same question to you, Lisa. What do you think people miss?
I think they miss that that Brooklyn is a beautiful place to live. That Crown Heights is a community, and it's a diverse community. Whether you're talking about the culture, the food, we have architecture, we have parks, we have places for kids to go to play, and it's a place for family. And when you just think of it as this bad, downtrodden area, you miss a lot of what it's really about. That small photo is not the big film of what Crown Heights is about. It's powerful, it's a positive place to live, and I wouldn't want to live anyplace else.
Sharon.
So, I mean, the first thing that, see, I knew I was going to be the one with the
Bring the mic a
problems,
little
right?
closer.
So, when I think about Crown Heights, I think about home and I think about families. And one of the things that it's such a family-centric community. I mean, people choose to live here because they can raise their families and have that sense of community. Be you someone of Caribbean descent, be you someone of African American descent, be you someone who's Jewish. And the world that is Brooklyn is all about the block. And when you look at Crown Heights, you're a member of the block, you're a member of the family. So no harm is going to come to a neighbor because we all look out for each other. And so to have this that there's great violence, that there's great unrest, there's socio-political reasons why that unrest happened that summer. One of the, not the least, but you had a lot of idle youth because the summer youth employment program had been cut that summer. So when you have, idleness, when you have people that don't have any stake in the community, that's when you see the changes. But that's not what Crown Heights is about. My dad is of the flashlight holding school. There is always a job for a child that has 2 free hands. If they have to hold the flashlight so I can turn this knob, something's going to happen. So, it looks like, it's something that was just one blip on the community and the harmony that we have within the community.
And same question to you, Michael, because I'm trying to catch up and see if you are the most recent. You seem to be the most recent resident of Crown Heights.
Possible, 2011?
Yeah, so you're the most recent. So you haven't seen it over the long term, but coming in, and where did you move from?
Clinton Hill.
From Clinton Hill.
Down the block.
You moved like 3 blocks. So,
Yes,
but what do you think people miss, in sort of the narrative of Crown Heights that people know?
Yeah, no, so interestingly, after I opened up the coffee shop there, my first business in Crown Heights, Little Zelda, you have 300 conversations a day with people. So you quickly are thrown into the welter of feelings and opinions and the experiment that is New York City and Brooklyn and Crown Heights of people from such diverse backgrounds getting together in tight spaces. And one of the things that I learned immediately, that people didn't know about the riots. So we're talking about kids, in their 20s who come, who, sort of pop in, like, how'd you end up in New York City from Missouri? Like, I don't know, Craigslist, and I'm just here, right? So there was not that historical background, which, of course, leads to a lot of insensitivity or perceived insensitivity to the history of the place. By the same token, the energy and joy that having young people, and I'm not one of them anymore. I'm 43. So
That's still young.
thank you.
According to, I'm saying that from our
I find it harder to relate to the young 20-year-olds. But that sort of energy is something that, because of being new to this world, maybe some of them weren't born during the riots, brings changing perspectives and an opportunity for new dialogue.
Well, and there's new dialogue, but also an opportunity for insensitivity, because I think you make a good point, and I think just based on what you just said, there is an opportunity for insensitivity when you don't really know the neighborhood and you don't know much about it. We were talking in the back about this story that's in Gothamist about a woman who opened up a boozy sandwich shop called Summerhill, in which part of the advertisement for it was that they're advertising a cocktail with a picture of it sitting by bullet holes in the wall. And the owner of it, who is not originally from New York, who moved here from out of, I think she might be from Canada, moved in, and who's a young woman in her early 30s, opens up this shop, sandwich shop, boozy sandwich shop, and says, we're keeping the bullet holes. That was part of her advertisement. We're keeping the bullet holes because that's seen as sort of making it cool. And people, in the neighborhood really have felt sort of shocked and embarrassed for her and angry by
Joy,
that.
she's going to learn really fast.
Yeah.
That is the great thing about Crown Heights. It is an education.
Yeah.
An everyday education. Myself, I know, as somebody who came in as like an experienced business person. I had opened 10 stores and I built this company. And in the business world, if you achieve success, you're idolized just for success, right? And that is the American way. It's a terrible thing. And I had values in my businesses about community and friendliness and plants and conversation that turned out not to be enough in Crown Heights. And it takes a few beatings to say, wait a minute, it's not just about being a nice person, actually.
Yeah. And Sharon, you talked about this idea that there's this neighborhood feel and that it's block by block, but at the same time, you had not only this situation, but you've had these fights over things called Crow Hill. And for those who don't know the history, there used to be sort of a term here, crows used to refer derisively to black people. So someone moves in and decides, I'm gonna call my bar Crow Hill, because I think that sounds cool, and then had to sort of be fought back to say you can't do that here. So, I mean, is there this natural sense of block by block community, or are people coming in and having to learn over and over and over and over again, like the blackface model, where no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, every time?
I mean, it's called, interestingly enough, David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times, wrote a great article today or yesterday about a sociologist, Pierre Boudreau. And you talk about being, what you see as your being, seeing, doing, how you operate in general forms. This is the way life is. This is how you operate in life. This is how you, interface with other people. And oftentimes people come from the experience of what was, and you come to Crown Heights, which is what is. And when you have those disagreements, when you have those rough slippages, for example, I'll use a personal example. I was coming into my apartment building with a lot of groceries. Well, and I couldn't find my keys. Well, there was someone standing on the other side of the door who plainly saw me struggling. And they opened the door after I found my key. So is it, generally speaking, if someone's coming after you, they're not bringing their groceries. So, understanding that sense of community. And the apologize was, oh, I didn't know. And I'm like, just a word of advice. When someone's bringing their groceries into an apartment building, they're not coming to look to rob someone. They're coming home. And, understanding those different kind of silos.
Yeah, and so Lisa, and I'll throw that to you as well, because you are, as a tenant advocate, you've obviously known that the price of living in Crown Heights has gone from really inexpensive, because lots of people didn't want to live there, to really expensive. The block where I live, a house 2 doors down, it just popped up in my Zillow as $1.5 million And these are brownstones that were being given away practically by the city at one point. So there is a change. So how do you think that rapid gentrification has impacted Crown Heights? And what happens to, I've always wondered this question, what happens to the people of struggling means who've been there the whole time? Where are they going? Is there a UFO beaming them up and taking them away? It's like, what happened?
It's really tough.
Talking to the mic a little bit.
I hear a lot of stories of, I have my own sob story of my landlord bought my building and tried to harass us out, harass most of the people out. I have my 80-year-old aunt. We went 2 winters without heat. So you're in the middle of this struggle, and you can leave, but you don't want to leave because you developed this neighborhood, you made this community. And then you see the people who are moving in, and you want to push back, and you want to be angry, and you want to feel like it's their fault, but it's not. They're just looking for a place to live. They're coming to New York. It's the best place to live. So you kind of to work that out, and you try to work through understanding that people are people, but meanwhile you have to draw that line in the sand that this is where we're going to stand. We have laws in place to keep us here. We're going to collaborate and help each other out. What I think was brought out by a panelist, that in Crown Heights, we are a community. When I go into my dry cleaners, they don't have to ask me my phone number or my name. They just grab it. I don't even have to wait. They just say, what day? And I leave because I've been dealing with this person so long. Mm-hmm. I know, like, for you, the Chinese restaurant on the corner is a place to get takeout. For me, that's John, how you doing? How's your baby? I've been in these communities for years. So the thing that you have to understand is you don't give up your home. This is your home. This is where your parents live. This is where your aunt lives. This is where you raised your children. So I'm not going anywhere, but by that same token, because the rents are so high, because you can't afford to move if you have something that's available, when my daughter graduates from college, I don't know if she's going to be able to come back and be with me. So I feel for the people in the middle of the country where their kids are leaving for the coast, because I'm looking at my child and say my child may end up in Europe or someplace else, because that may be easier for her to do what she has to do. So you take it on a daily basis, a case-by-case basis, and you make sure that you're transparent, because there's somebody there who can help you stay and get what you need to get.
And Mordechai, what's interesting, there are lots of interesting things obviously about Crown Heights, but one of them is that Crown Heights is sort of the product of a certain kind of gentrification that only can really happen in a city. Because there are lots of places in many cities in America where black people were pushed, particularly in the early 20th century, but Jewish people were pushed to the same place. Black people and Jewish people have almost always shared what used to be called the ghetto. And when white flight happens, oftentimes the only people who don't flee are the Jewish community. They're still there. So you still have black and Jewish people still in the community. So in Crown Heights, that's the case, is that you have a very large, very old Jewish community that's been there since the 20s and 30s as well. Has that community experienced the same kind of upheavals of gentrification and the challenges with, the second and third generations being able to stay?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say we've definitely experienced it. And what's interesting about the way I see it affecting my community is that on a superficial level, the community continues to grow. People have more children, families grow, schools grow, the institutions remain, the institutions grow stronger. I mean, the Chabad movement, that kind of global movement that stems from Crown Heights, the Crown Heights diaspora of choice, as it were, is in 95 countries around the world. You have, 4,000 emissary couples, that's husbands and wives with their children all around the world. So in that sense, it's grown, and when you have, holidays, people come in and the population swells. At the same time, we speak about, the millennial Hasidim, as it were. People in my cohort that are starting to set up lives, getting married, having children, there's a lot of pressure. And I can't think of a gathering, of a meal, of a get-together, of a conversation, in the pews of the synagogue, as it were, that hasn't spoken about how am I going to be able to afford to live here. Because you see that I have a friend who, his parents are in Crown Heights, his grandparents are in Crown Heights, his great-grandparents moved to Crown Heights, and he was in tears. He said, I want to live here, I want to stay here, I want to be with my family, and I can't. And ultimately, those people that stay in Brooklyn end up leaving Crown Heights, almost, the vast majority of them, unless they're somehow privileged and gifted to have these huge sums of money for a home or for an apartment. And they end up moving to East Flatbush or to Brownsville, East New York, those kind of neighborhoods nearby. And then many others just leave. I have a friend that moved to not Miami, but kind of the South Florida area just because homes are cheaper there and he's able to move. And what's interesting about that change is the synagogue stays on Eastern Parkway in Kingston. That's not going anywhere. The big institutions are there, but suddenly you have this kind of change that since as Orthodox Jews on Shabbat and on the Sabbath, we don't drive. So suddenly I have a friend and he's moved out to Linden and somewhere. And I live on Lincoln Place, and he had a baby, and I want to go to the kind of the Friday night gathering before the circumcision, and I want to see my friend. He's a classmate. I've known him for 15 years. But now suddenly I have to think, well, it's almost a 2-mile walk and late at night. Do I want to make that walk? And that change is not seen from the outside, but internally it's very much felt, where families are becoming isolated, people are being broken up.
And so just in that vein, the other things that don't change is that some of the underlying challenges in the neighborhood remain. Then when the new quote unquote people come in who have lots of money and can afford to buy $1 million brownstone, you still have a lot of people with a lot of challenges that haven't left. They can't afford to leave, for one thing, or they're renters, so they can't flip their house and make enough money to move to North Carolina, so they're still there. One of the things that your organization deals with is some of these issues underlying that are still taking place that some of the new residents might be surprised about. There's still some violence, there's still some issues. So how can that be balanced while these communities are attracting $1 million buyers, but still dealing with some of these issues of crime and upheaval internally?
That is the heart of the question of our challenge. Well, one thing about Crown Heights that's been true since I've been working there for the past 15 years is that there's so many dedicated, caring people willing to work together to tackle really hard issues such as inequity, lack of safety, housing, and I think the solution really lies in community organizing and people coming from different perspectives, different backgrounds, and orientations and understandings, and working from a strength-based perspective of what can we all add together and really tackling like incredibly difficult issues. So we had tremendous success at the Mediation Center looking at the issue of gun violence, and it came to us. We have a storefront. We help anybody who comes in with whatever they come to us about. And there was a mother who came to us and said that her son had been shot, and she asked for help. And what we did was gather together people who don't normally come together, people who are often siloed, whether it has to do with professional or background, people who had been involved in gun violence themselves, people who are very close to it, and came up with a proposal of what we could do. And in 2009, in the area that we focus, there was 24 shootings, and this past year there were 7. So I'm convinced that the solutions really is in us here and in us working hard together.
And Lisa, how is that also that issue being tackled within, because there are still some communities, public housing communities in Crown Heights, there are, and I'm quite sure that these issues are important to them too. How is that being balanced against a quite, I have to say, nervousness about an increased police presence, because that's not necessarily the answer.
It's funny because right around the corner from me on Nostrand and Pacific, they had one of those towers where the police stood there and watched, and then down the other way on the block, they actually had a big police van that sat there for like months at a time. And the long-term residents of the neighborhood, my neighbors, we look at each other and said, oh, where was this in the 70s when the crack epidemic and somebody had to meet you at the subway station to walk you home, otherwise you would get robbed. So on one hand you go, oh, this is great, and on the other hand you feel like that you were not loved and you were not cared for. But you always got to go bigger picture and understand, okay, this is making our neighborhood better. I'm still here. My neighbors are still here. But, it's still Brooklyn. There's still crime. The apartment across the hall from me, the young lady brought a bike, and she came back and she said, my bike was stolen. I was like, still Brooklyn. So, so you have to still be mindful. You have to still be aware. Is it safer? Can I walk down Herkimer Street now and not worry about, because when I was in my 20s and I partied, I didn't walk down Herkimer Street because that's where prostitutes were. So now you could walk down at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, it's perfectly safe. So you see things get better, but you know, where there's problems with the economy, where people are unemployed, where people are underemployed, you're gonna have crime and you're gonna have violence. So you try just to look out for your neighbors and be mindful.
And Michael, from the perspective of business owners, I know where I live, there's all of the little wine shops. Not that I drop by a ton of wine. I have a stressful job, so yes. All the wine shops have bulletproof glass, and I actually don't like to shop there because it's just an unpleasant experience. Just walking in and sort of already feeling like a suspect.
Criminalizes you.
Right, and so how can businesses both obviously look out for their employees, make sure that they're safe, and balance the fact that, of course, there's crime. There's crime in Montana. I mean, there's crime everywhere, right? But that that there still are businesses that are reluctant to fully integrate in terms of opening that glass.
I'm by no means an expert on this topic, but I can tell you my own experience is on the corner of Nostrand and St. John, when I opened that bar, Two Saints, a few years ago, the Caribbean restaurant next door, anybody remember the name? It's on St. John. She sold
Glenda.
no, not Glenda. Glenda's. So I was like, hey, Glenda, we have the security gates. I'm gonna take them off. She's like, are you crazy? She had the bulletproof glass. Or maybe I was asking her about hers and saying, do you think maybe it's time to take your glass down because, of that experience? And she said, nope, still Brooklyn, to steal your phrase, because that's, anyway. So there was that dichotomy, and I said, well, let's just see what happens. And nothing has ever happened in terms of like break-ins or glass being broken. So, I don't know what that means. I can only tell you that I decided to trust and see what would happen.
And Sharon, just as a long, jump
So
in.
I see it from a different perspective, because people say now that we have new neighbors, right, we have all of this safety in place. What I see is the advocacy that happens at the community level, from block associations, which are really the building blocks of advocacy, tenants associations, people on the community board. And they've been fighting for 4, 5, 6 years. You walk down Franklin Avenue now, and it's almost like Disneyland compared to what it was 15 years ago. I mean, in all honesty, people will sit on a bench with their back facing Franklin Avenue after dark. Unheard of at one point. But what happened was there were 3 older women who were just sick of it. And the advocacy came from them wanting to, not have break-ins in their cars. But it started with the whole streetscape on Franklin Avenue. So, you fix the streets, literally, the utilities, the repaving of the road, the sidewalks, the lighting, and focusing with the police, the police precinct to make sure that there's safety. So I talk about the way you travel in the world. Now, those of us who grew up in Brooklyn or grew up in this part of Brooklyn know that when you go down Franklin Avenue, you walk down the street, but you're aware of your surroundings. And you'll have people who have not lived here, who have come from other parts of the country, and they're surprised that they're walking down the street when iPhones were new and their headphones were in, and someone took their iPhone. You're walking down Franklin Avenue, so if you talk about like what your Mayan is as someone who grew up in Brooklyn, it's, the phrase would be act like you know. So, so someone who's new is like, well, I called the police department and I called 911 or I called 311 and they took action. No, this is the result of years and years of advocacy within the community to make it safer, to make it more appealing. One of the things, I talked to one of my friends about this, because most Black Protestants in Crown Heights worship in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So I remember going to as a child and a teenager, going to church. And what did you do after church? You went home. Why? Because there was no place to eat. Now, if you go to Bedford-Stuyvesant, along Lewis Avenue, along Tompkins Avenue, there's so many places that on a Friday night, you can't get into any place. So it's not that that there wasn't a demand there. The demand was always there. There was a population that had the ability to, utilize those services, but they weren't there. So the change doesn't come necessarily because they're newly arrived people. What it has happened is there's a recognition of what you have in Crown Heights and what you have in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which I'm really proud of. The advocacy, because some of the advocacy, you talk about Weeksville, you talk about a visionary of Joan Maynard, and then I think about my best friend in elementary school. Her mother was the secretary when they first started the Society for the Preservation of Weeksville and Bedford-Stuyvesant. So they're showing us how to be advocates. As elementary school students, we went to the Board of Estimates. So when you're talking about having a bunch of 9-year-olds talking about, listen, we go to this pretty elementary school, but across the street there's a mess, and we deserve it as children to be able to have these self-venues. So it's not, the whole crime thing, the whole how people are treated. And I'm with you, Joy. If I go into a liquor store, not that I go into a liquor store often, but if it's someplace that I walk in the front door and I have to point to say what I want, well, actually, as a business owner, you're making money from me spending money in your store for these goods and services. So if you're saying it's too dangerous for us to be here, then I really would want you to think of doing business elsewhere. Because how you perceive the community and how you treat the community is how the community responds to you in kind.
The name Bed-Stuy was invoked, so I have to ask this question because one of the other sort of features that I've noticed of the sort of gentrification around the city, around New York City, is that once rich folks show up, suddenly the names of things start to change. Suddenly people think Harlem is the Upper West Side, or Bed-Stuy is Stuyvesant Heights. How does Crown Heights prevent itself? Well, it's already a Heights, but how does it prevent itself from losing its identity or having parts of it locked off to be a sort of a special part of the community that is really, a very 1% community that blocks off the rest? And that can be for anyone.
Well, actually, that already started. We have someone who's a congressman that represents parts of central Brooklyn. He was an assemblyman before that. And you usually see the push in the name change being generated by realtors. And, they want to expand boundaries of places where they think are safe. So, you look at an address, it's like, that is not East Williamsburg, that is Bushwick. Prospect Heights, it's Crown Heights. Or, you have someone saying, oh, Sharon, that restaurant that we're going to meet at, that's in Crown Heights. So, sweetie pie, can I explain something to you? It's like when you're coming to my apartment, when you make the left on my side of the street, that's Prospect Heights. You cross the street, that's Crown Heights, okay? So, that change is having that sense of it. And going back to the elected representative, Congressman Jeffrey, when he was an assemblyman, he basically said, listen, this pro Prospect Heights, no, this is the way of the community. So you have to have your leaders and your community stand up. We're special as we are.
And I'm going to go to Michael and I'm going to add a question more too. But do you ever find that you'll have sort of out-of-towners who want to frequent one of your establishments and say, so where are you located? Are you in Prospect Heights? And sort of kind of nudge you out of Crown Heights. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I guess everybody remembers when it was like pro, they were trying that 5 years ago, and I was like, what? No.
And that's like the most toolish name I've
Yeah,
ever
it's
heard.
terrible. So I think a couple things on this topic, which I haven't really thought about before, but like, first of all, everybody loves where they live now, and like, no one's gonna let that happen. Second thing is that at that time when they were trying to expand, realtors were trying to expand Prospect Heights, it was like, I think it was more valuable, I think they realized it in the end, to say Crown Heights than Prospect Heights. Because it had, Franklin Avenue, restaurants, and energy that was happening that certainly isn't happening in all residential Prospect Heights.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's the same for your community.
It's actually interesting. I see something that I'm waiting. I have a thing going with my friends, and I want to see when like the western part of Brownsville becomes Rocro or something. What I find fascinating is really Crown Heights to me has always been a concept. It's always been something that goes far beyond the geography. And as I look, as my friends kind of move out and are being pushed out of Crown Heights, where does Crown Heights end? Does it end by Empire? Does it end by Lefferts? Does it end by Maple? How far out? I think Linden Boulevard, to some people's like, that's not Crown Heights at all. But if you have that pride and that love, and it means something to you, and this place is powerful and represents something, its history and its people, and it's these powerful concepts, then I think that name becomes, eternal almost. It doesn't go away.
And I mean, it for the work you do, I mean, I realize it's a lot more sort of community-based. You hear this from people, members of the community sort of feeling like maybe what Crown Heights meant when they were growing up is sort of being lost in a bad way.
Yeah, I hear a lot of loss and pain and confusion as people, who've lived in the place for years and years, wake up every morning and people look like the people that they grew up with, the stores that they frequented are closing. Someone just told me that they've been away for a little while, not that long, maybe, I think it was about 9 months, and got off the subway, and everything was so different. He thought he got off at the wrong subway stop because the people getting off, and I certainly had that experience when I went on maternity leave for a few months, and I came back and I just felt like, oh, it's not that I knew everybody on the block, but the feeling was so different. So I think for some people that I work with, there's some interest. I mean, I also work more on the eastern side of Crown Heights, where gentrification is happening, but it isn't as much as it's been on the other side. And there's a curiosity and anxiety and interest. And somebody said to me the other day, they were talking about Brower Park, and they said, "Can you explain to us why all the new people sit on the grass?" So, I think there's,
That's the grass that the dog sees, right?
Yeah. My
They
dog,
don't know yet.
yeah. My dog's Monday Fun Day is running around the grass pooping on it. So, I wonder if people may not want to sit on that. I want to talk about two other issues that always do impact communities, one of which is, of course, education, and sort of how the local schools sort of fare when this all takes out. Let's just start with that. So, and this I can throw out to anyone, especially the longtime residents. Are the local schools in Crown Heights keeping up with gentrification, or are you seeing what you see in places like Chelsea, where people live there and are affluent there, but their kids don't go to school in the local schools, they go to private schools elsewhere?
I think the first gentrifiers, if I may, they weren't families, so they weren't using the community services. They weren't going to the schools, so they weren't active in PTAs. They weren't using the neighborhood facilities. So, like, as I said, I've lived in my neighborhood for over 4 years. So I went to my local public school. That school now, if you look at the numbers, like the level where the kids are passing the reading is less than 30%, in the math test, less than 30%. So when you have people coming from outside of the community, being the teachers and being the educators, they're not as invested in those students because they're not going to see those students in the neighborhood, in the community. And I just, that along with trying to turn it into a business, I think Bloomberg tried to turn the education system into a business, and you can't run it that way. You're talking about people. So there's certain levels of fundamental skills that have to be there, and they're not making sure that they put that back in the community, and there's no uproar about it because these new people who are coming in, they don't have families. Like, I was always active. I always supplemented my kids' education. I graduated right here from Brooklyn Tech. Both of my kids graduated from Brooklyn Tech. So I was always active in the school systems and everything else, but now I'm not seeing it. And part of that is that you've lost some of the families that were there. So, but now I'm seeing families come in, but I don't know if they're gonna go to the local schools. Because if I looked at those numbers, I would have put my child in that school. So you're not gonna get the council people and the politicians to make sure that they empower these schools. They're coming up with charter schools, and they're splitting these schools up into all, so you have these big facilities, and it's not working the way I think it should work for a neighborhood. So the short answer is no, it's not helping our local services, the way the gentrifiers have come into our communities.
And Michael, I know one of the things that you focus on in your businesses is trying to hire local people in the community. So how does that impact your ability to then bring in, local employees? Because a lot of that is often drawn from the local high school.
Yeah, I'm not working with any teenagers, so it's not, I prefer to develop careers, people who have, I would say not getting a fair shot at showing off their skills and making those people managers and having them hire people and starting that cycle. I know that Sharon is an expert in education, that's my understanding. The way you were speaking certainly sounded like, so I don't want to stand in front and say anything about education, but I want to just offer another perspective or interesting note to get back just to the education topic. As a father of 2 daughters made in Crown Heights, it might be interesting just to say that PS 705 is very hard to get into now. And so it's sort of seen as an elite school that the gentrifying families have a hard time getting into, for what it's worth.
So I see a very different perspective, and I see it from, again, the building of it. So Lisa made some allusions to it. I'm going, not political, but during the Bloombergian era, the chancellor saw the problems with the schools were not the schools themselves or the students, but the communities. And he consciously made policy decisions to try and divest the schools from the community. What you saw are parents who want the same experience of their children being able to walk to their local schools and becoming advocates. So you look at some schools that are designated as failures, and oftentimes they stack the deck against them. So if you look at middle school, I met someone. Let's get back to the point. I want to make it concise as possible, but what I discovered is that there are very ardent parent advocates. As Lisa said, there is a second wave of quote-unquote gentrifiers. What you're seeing is them becoming engaged because they want their children to attend the local public schools. So in Bedford-Stuyvesant, there's a group called Bed-Stuy Parents. And in Crown Heights, or District 17, you're seeing a group of parents that come under the moniker of Live Here, Learn Here. But you see, so they want their children to go to local public schools. The challenges become when we talk about, the power of concentration, what's right, what is natural, what is best. And you have 2 different groups making those decisions. You have the people who have been laboring with different entities, the charter schools, the early learning centers, the public schools, coming against parents that because they're not part of that network, they think nothing exists. So for example, scheduling, going back to religious differences, scheduling a meeting on Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock does not make it for a Black Protestant family who worships in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Because if they have children, they're just getting out from church and they can't make that transition. So their absence is not the absence of desire, concern, or action, it's because it doesn't fit their lifestyle. So, and then you're also seeing parents that recognize what schools are strong, because there are a lot of schools that are strong in Bedford-Stuyvesant and in Crown Heights. And you're seeing parents gravitating to particular schools, but again, not understanding that you need to collaborate with not only your children, but what's best for all children. And that's where you're having some friction. So there are very strong schools. I have a niece that attends a school that she's a first grade, she'll be a first grader in September. She reads beautifully, and she has had the opportunity to have violin lessons within her school, which is something that's very desirable, I would think, at the elementary school level. And there's a fight to strengthen other schools, but you have to undo 12 years of conscious uncoupling to be able to create the strong schools that people of my generation attended. Because one of the things I'm very proud of is that I am a proud public school graduate. I got a foundation in an elementary school that led me to gain admission to several elite colleges, the best of the best. And when I got to college as a freshman, people would ask me where I prepped. And when I responded New York City Public School, they laughed and they're waiting for the correct answer. I'm serious. So we have that desire, we have that ability. Now we have to re-strengthen the institutions that were once strong so we can have those same outcomes again.
Yes. So we are now coming to the portion where you guys get to ask your questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you raise your hand. We're going to hand you a mic. But please know that when we hand you the mic, we don't expect you to then do a TV show, because we want to keep it short. Keep it short. Don't make a speech, make sure there's a question mark at the end of your question. And just to remind you who you're talking to, this is Amy, Mordechai, Lisa, Sharon, Michael. You can direct it to one of them or general. So raise your hands up high, please say your name and give your questions. Lots of questions here. So we're going to try to work the whole room. We're going to try to get as many women as men and men as women. Everybody.
Hi.
Here.
My name is Bindu, and I have one point to make and a question for Mike. So one point regarding gentrification in schools, I'm no longer a teacher, but I was. And someone that I know who's currently a teacher, she mentioned that with gentrification, a lot of, this is in Bed-Stuy, by the way, a lot of the students were in temporary housing because their parents couldn't afford where they were staying, and so that affected the school population, where 5 years ago, maybe it was only 10% of students in temporary housing. Now they're working with a population of 40% of students in temporary housing. So it's hard to reach those students. The psychological damages that happen, but that's just a whole other discussion. So I just wanted to point that out, that gentrification does affect the classroom in numerous ways. And for Michael, I have a question, like, no offense, but like you're coming in and you started 9 businesses, right, since 2011. So for someone who's in the neighborhood already and maybe couldn't get those opportunities, or even, I remember it was some ridiculous statistic years ago where like the number of city contracts and for blacks, it was just like so low compared to other demographics. So as someone who is able to come in and have the success, what advice, if you could give any, let's say if you had like a 5-point or 5-step plan or anything, for someone who is from the neighborhood and they're seeing all these businesses opening and seeing that I don't have these opportunities, what would you say to that person? Like, this is what you can do to get this, it won't be the same opportunity you have because you come from a different background and everything, but you know, just get in there.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to take a question from you. It's very exciting, and an honor to be on this panel of people who are advocating so hard and doing amazing work. So I recognize my position here. Crown Heights has changed me fundamentally. I feel like I am on a social justice mission, and I think about business that way and growing them. But to answer your question, so I've opened businesses because I have a personality flaw, and I sort of can't stop. It's just what I do. I'm like manic, and I'm good at it. Like, I understand how to make a phone call and ask how much it is and think that's a good price, and sort of make these entrepreneurial decisions. So entrepreneurs, like sort of weirdos who have these same characteristics. And if you're interested in opening a business, be delighted to speak to you. No one ever comes to me and says, how do you open a business? Like, tell me everything you know. And like, it's never happened once. So I'd be happy to talk to you personally at any time. But I would say a great thing for anybody to do, if you're just interested in the neighborhood in general, is like every time you see a for rent sign, call up and say, hey, I want to open a coffee shop. How much is it? You'll learn so much about changing things. And I quickly want to say, and maybe we can talk more, that Nostrand Avenue is the most fascinating street in America. And it is going to change. Talk about gentrification. It is going to change. Every single business on Nostrand Avenue is going to change. In the next year, 6 months, 2 years, every time the lease ends, which is every day there's a lease ending, it's going to change. The rents are going from $1,200 or $800 to $5,000, and it changes everything. Watch Nostrand Avenue as like the model of change in the world, probably.
And the other issue, and I think it's endemic in your question, is who is able to walk into a bank and get a loan, or who That's a bigger conversation. It's not about Crown Heights.
Yeah, the short answer is don't take a loan. Do something really cheap, and if it works, it'll work. If it's not, if people don't want it, then it won't work, and you just got to experiment and try.
And before we go to this question here, Amy had a point she wanted to make about the bulletproof glass. I'm gonna let you do it real quick.
I'm pondering that because I was thinking about the trauma that business owners may have experienced, and that what it's like to have been a business owner at a liquor store where there was a lot of gun violence and maybe people lost their lives or took bullets in front of you, and what led to the decision to put up those bulletproof glass. And I wanted to bring that in just to add a little nuance, because I understand how it feels, and it feels like when you go in, it's not an open experience, and it doesn't, and maybe you feel criminalized, and you feel like I'm being reminded of violence when I want to get my bottle of rosé. You know, but it is different for a new business owner to come in and say, like, you know, maybe hasn't had that trauma or didn't live through those years on Franklin Avenue and says, like, I'm going to have an open space. And I just wanted to, like, respect that.
And by the way, many of these business owners are also people of color. They're actually not, I mean, in my community, these are, the liquor stores are not owned by, you know, white business owners. They're, in some cases, Asian American. So there's a lot of cross-cultural tension from the past that's, I think, carried over. You had a question?
Kenneth Harris. So this is exactly along the same lines of what I was going to sort of bring up in question. So I'm from Baltimore. Been in Brooklyn for a long time. I lived in Bed-Stuy. Obviously, we talked a lot about Bed-Stuy. So just forgive me, because I've got a lot to different levels. But one is, you know, we've talked about culture, we've talked about race to some extent. We've talked about socioeconomics. And I just wonder where this is going to end. You know, I've lived in my neighborhood for about 8-9 years now. I genuinely love white people. I love everybody. To be perfectly honest. But the situation, you know, we're talking about gentrification. It makes me resent my neighbors, and many of them are white that are moving in. If we're being perfectly honest, and I just don't know where this goes. And as someone that moved to New York, and maybe I'm a gentrifier in my own, I'm a college educated, happen to be black. I don't know if that makes me gentrifier myself. I don't know where this goes. And to this young lady's point about 40% of children in traditional housing, you know, I live in a building that happen to have a rent-stabilized lease, so I'm protected, but there are people in my building who are being kicked out, and people in my neighborhood being kicked out, and I don't know what that means for New York City going forward. It doesn't seem to bode well. I mean, maybe everybody's going to work in tech and work in fields that make a lot of money. I just don't know where it goes, and I'm wondering what's going to be done, what should be done.
It's a really good question. I mean, I'll throw that to anyone, but maybe to the longest running residents, and you guys jump in.
You know, my 80-year-old aunt in my building, you get to know that people are not from New York when they give you their cell phone number. And it's this exchange that, like, where the heck is this? So, my aunt gave everybody the side eye, because there was 3 of us left in the building, and 5 tenants, and they cut down the apartment, so you have 5 people who are unrelated to each other. So she's looking at them, and we do our garbage a certain way, we do everything, and then they're throwing things, and so she just said, I had enough. She stood in front of the garbage, and every single one she told them, this is not how we do this is the recycle, do not throw this, if your dog goes here. And she did this for a couple of weeks, and then what happened is, they didn't get mad at her. They didn't get upset with her. They respected the fact that she was older, that she lived in this building, and guess what? Now the garbage is done that way. So she learned that these are just people. So if you can look at your neighbor as just a person, and as a person, we don't like everybody, so there's going to be people that, you know, no matter what, you're not going to like them. But if you could look at them as a person, you could find some common ground without giving up what your needs are, then I think that there's still the hope. I haven't given up hope for Crown Heights. I have no desire to go anywhere else. And in my head, as the Rabbi said, it's about what your faith is and what family is. And the thing that will maintain any community is family. So at some point, it has to be set up where it empowers family. And people will get a clue and they will understand. So neighborhoods will stay neighborhoods or return to neighborhoods. So I feel your heart, because when I'm at that 8 train station and I have to let 3 trains go by because the density in my community now is ridiculous, I'm giving everybody the side eye.
I'm wondering if your community feels, I mean, is there a feeling inside of the Jewish community that has also been in Crown Heights a long time? Is there that same kind of resentment when you're seeing all these people moving in?
Well, so I totally agree. I am a man of the work. I love everybody. But the limited economics is what really is what is going to change these neighborhoods completely. And, you know, the kumbaya, et cetera, you know, it is the economics in the end. And these neighborhoods are going to change. I don't know if I should just resign myself to that or, you know.
So change is inevitable, but when you're talking about housing, particularly development of new housing, and we talk about affordable housing doesn't jive with what people actually earn. So you're going to have to look for two things. You're going to have to look for housing that is worker wage based, you know, so that you can afford to live here. You also have to look at the current protections that people are chipping away earnestly. You have things like Mitchell-Lama housing, right, which was built for the middle class, and they were high-rise buildings for the most part, high density, in neighborhoods that people didn't want to live in. And again, creating a community where you had working people that invested in their community over the generations, and you have that stability. So when you're looking at stability, a lot of your friends that are able to stay in Crown Heights are able to stay because their families have owned businesses. So when you talk about affordable housing, let's not just talk about affordable rentals. Let's talk about affordable limited equity cooperatives. Let's talk about affordable ownership opportunities. Because the ownership opportunities is what's completely absent from the discussion about housing.
Very quickly, and then we're going to have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the perception of people moving in, I live off, my wife is in the audience, we live off of Utica Avenue, and I used to, you know, feel like, you know, if I didn't have a seat, you know, I could stand, you know, excuse me, from, you know, a white person or something like that, I might land to get off, like in my seat, or, you know, someone else would just let them sit there, whatever it is. Now that I remember the day happening, and I'm standing and waiting, and we both got out to Utica, and there's a guy there, you know, row in shorts, November, he's got like 2 bags from Trader Joe's, and I'm like, what are you doing here? But at the same time, and this is something that, as a rabbi, it will allow me to share a thought, as it were, from the Moderator Rabbi, who's obviously someone whose presence was and continues to be central for many, many people in Crown Heights, many people around the world, is that the way Jewish people divide up the Torah, the Bible. So right now we read the section that's at the very end of the book of Numbers. And there, Moses goes through and he enumerates all the different places that the Jewish people went from Egypt to the Promised Land. And that when you stand, right now we're all, so to speak, standing, all of us on our personal journeys, our lives' journeys, we're all right before the Promised Land. But you have to turn back and look, where did I come from? Here was good, here was great, this was bad. Here people died, there was suffering here, there was joy here, there was marriage and birth, all these different things happen. And I think when people move into the neighborhood, you know, they need to look, and you can move into a wasteland. You can move into some sort of empty place where there's nothing here before. People lived and died and celebrated and, you know, and prayed and came together and mourned, and all these different things happened. And when people moving in, if they have that respect for the people that are there, and they're aware that there are stories here and journeys here, amazing, deep things that happen here, and you respect that, and you acknowledge that, it may not be your thing, it may be different. You may go to Franklin Avenue for the tacos, I don't know why, but that's the thing apparently. But whatever it is, when you acknowledge that there are people here before you, and there's a safety to that, and there's a beauty to that, then I think that allows, obviously all the economic things aside, but I think that allows, you know, the integration to happen, and people to come together, and the humanity that we all share to be acknowledged.
Hello, good evening. My name is Judith Lavelle, and I've been a Crown Heights resident for over 50 years. And growing up, I always felt that sense of community. We would go into neighbors' houses and eat and know their parents, their grandparents, their dogs. We looked out for one another, and it was really wonderful. I don't feel that anymore. And I was just wondering from the panel if you could give creative, tangible approaches that people could use to generate a feeling of community between long-timers and the newcomers.
Good question.
Yes. Thank you for that. So first of all, the Mediation Center runs piece called Legal Hands. And what we do at Legal Hands is we train neighbors in how to help each other with legal issues of all kinds. So it's a very extensive, rigorous training, and our office is open 6 days a week and has late hours. So if neighbors can learn how to help, like very concretely, and help each other, we also have events that bring people together. SOS is a movement to stop gun violence based in the community. So we hire people who are local from the neighborhood, who have grown up and have the, in the neighborhood, know to interrupt violence before they happen. But we're also working on norm change, and we're growing. We have hundreds of people who are volunteers who can contribute to the events that we organize that we hope bring people together. So there's block parties that we organize. There's lots of block parties, events in the park. And there's a role for everybody in that. We also have an arts festival where we invite neighbors of all ages and all abilities to create art, and we do a showcase, and the pieces go into the laundromats and barber shops. Everybody can contribute. And we did a campaign called Kind Heights, like hashtag Kind Heights, where we tried to create a counter map, because we have these shooting maps that show where there's instances of shootings. We made a map to show little places where people saw kindness in Crown Heights, and you can write a little on social media. You can say I saw a woman helping someone with a stroller down. That's how we do it in Crown Heights. So those are some very concrete ways that the Mediation Center has done that.
I'm sort of a low-tech person, and it starts with because there are people that have moved in and out of the neighborhood. Sometimes you leave your house, and sometimes you leave your apartment. Good morning. Good afternoon. And if you have a neighbor that doesn't respond, I'm from Brooklyn. This is how we do things. Good morning.
Okay, we have time, I think, for one more question. Let's try to find one more.
I want to say that I totally believe in what you're saying. Cross-cultural, reading is very, for me anyway, it's very powerful. I try to be super extroverted, and I see it in other people too. Saying hello to me. I think it's also possibly a Korean. There's a lot of good afternoon, good evening on the street, which I love. And that breaks tension in the ice. It's so nice. I actively, basically everyone else.
That is a Caribbean thing. Okay, here we go.
Hi. So I'm a new resident of Crown Heights, but when I moved in, I wanted to get involved in the community, so I went to the nearby community garden and started helping out with the chicken coop there. Unfortunately, we've learned now that one of the lots was sold through a series of bureaucratic errors at the city and the state of New York. So at this point, I'm wondering if you all on the panel have seen ways to preserve public space, particularly public spaces that are not necessarily tied to an economic transaction, so people can interact with each other by just being in space that's shared.
I sort of feel, so here's the thing, what's happened is that, the community gardens have been so essential to a lot of communities. And some, I know in Crown Heights in Ward 8, there was a garden that was essentially abandoned by a former business, which was a daycare center. There's several not-for-profits that are engaged with preserving the green space, preserving that community. If you want to know who they are and how they're active, I would strongly suggest that you contact the respective community board. Crown Heights is covered by Community Board 8 in the north and Community Board 9. The dividing line is Eastern Parkway. But again, that same kind of communal effort that happens in a garden is a communal effort that can happen in terms of organizing some things that have been wrong on. We have some blocks that have active block parties and everybody looks forward to them. Planning an event is not a 1 day or 1 week. It's a community effort. So becoming engaged with your neighbors is another way of doing that. And again, I would strongly advocate for getting engaged with community boards so you can find other organizations within the community that might be doing the same things that you're interested in.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to end because I think it's so important that people understand that You know, whether you are a longtime resident, 20, 30, 40 years, your family's been there forever, or you're a new resident, you really need to get involved at the local level, the school boards, the local organizations, because trust me, the rich folks moving in will get involved. They are going to get very involved in what happens in the community. And I think one of the things you see is that the services, when I moved back to Brooklyn, I was born here, but I didn't live here my whole life, is that I noticed that the basic services weren't there until the new people came. And then all of a sudden they show up and the garbage is getting picked up and things. Because the new people are going to demand the services. So if you live in Crown Heights and you're a long-term resident, you should be demanding them too, because you have a right to have good service as well. I want to thank everybody for being here. Amy, Mordechai, Lisa, Sharon, Michael. Please give them a round of applause.